Chapter 1: A City Under the Cross. The city of Florence, during the height of the Renaissance, was a living canvas. Vibrant frescoes adorned the walls of its churches, depicting saints and martyrs in vivid colors, while marble sculptures stood as silent witnesses to the city's grandeur. The cobblestone streets echoed with the rhythm of daily life, filled with merchants hawking their wares, artists sketching inspirations, and scholars debating philosophy. Yet, amidst this symphony of culture, one force reigned supreme: the Church. Its influence towered over Florence, both figuratively and literally, with the Grand Duomo casting its shadow across the bustling squares. The Church's grip extended beyond matters of faith; it dictated the boundaries of art, music, and even thought itself. To challenge its authority was to risk everything: status, freedom, even life. For Alessandro Bernardi, this tension between creation and control was a constant struggle. A composer of extraordinary talent, Alessandro was celebrated in noble courts for his ability to weave melodies that seemed to capture the very essence of human emotion. His music was a balm to the soul, a bridge between the earthly and the divine. Yet, for all his acclaim, Alessandro lived a life of quiet frustration. The Church's strict edicts on music stifled his creative spirit, forcing him to conform to a rigid framework of sacred themes and approved harmonies. He longed to break free, to compose pieces that spoke to the full spectrum of human experience, not just reverence and piety, but also love, loss, and the untamed beauty of life itself. One fateful evening, weary of the constraints that bound him, Alessandro took to the streets of Florence for a solitary walk. The city, usually alive with activity, had settled into a serene hush under the cover of night. The Arno River glimmered in the moonlight, its surface rippling gently with the breeze. Alessandro's thoughts drifted as he strolled along the riverbank, his mind a tempest of unfinished melodies and unspoken dreams. It was then that he heard it, a voice, pure and haunting, cutting through the stillness like a beam of light through shadow. The melody was unlike anything Alessandro had ever encountered. It was raw yet refined, a song that seemed to rise from the depths of the soul. He followed the sound, his heart quickening with each step, until it led him to a small, secluded garden enclosed by a weathered stone wall. Peering through a narrow gap, Alessandro's breath caught in his throat. There, bathed in silver moonlight, stood a young woman, her golden hair cascading over her shoulders like a river of light. She sang with her eyes closed, lost in the music, her voice carrying an aching beauty that seemed to transcend the boundaries of this world. For a moment, Alessandro simply watched, unable to tear his gaze away. The woman's presence was magnetic, her song a force that held him spellbound. When she finally opened her eyes and noticed him, their gazes locked. In that instant, Alessandro felt as though the very fabric of his life had shifted. He saw not just a stranger, but a kindred spirit, someone who understood the unspoken language of his soul. "Who are you?" he managed to whisper, his voice trembling with awe. The woman hesitated, her expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. "Isabella," she replied softly, her voice as melodic as her song. Later, Alessandro would come to know her full name, Isabella di Rossi, the daughter of Bishop Lorenzo di Rossi, one of the most powerful and influential men in Florence. But in that moment, she was simply Isabella, a vision of grace and beauty, a living embodiment of the music that had long lived unspoken in Alessandro's heart. Their meeting was brief, a mere exchange of names and glances, but it was enough to set Alessandro's world alight. As he walked home that night, the melody of Isabella's song lingered in his mind, intertwining with his own unspoken compositions. He felt a spark of inspiration, a sense that his music could become something more, something transcendent. Yet, even as he dreamed of the possibilities, he could not ignore the shadow of the church that loomed over them both. Isabella was the daughter of a bishop, a man whose power could destroy Alessandro with a single word. To pursue her, to even think of her, was to court disaster. And yet, Alessandro could not turn away. In Isabella's voice, he had heard not just a song, but a calling. In her eyes, he had glimpsed a world beyond the constraints of Florence, a world where music was free to soar. It was a world he was determined to reach, no matter the cost. Chapter 2: A Forbidden Encounter. The bustling market square of Florence was alive with color and sound. Merchants called out their wares, their voices blending into a cacophony of bartering, laughter, and the occasional clinking of coins. Stalls overflowed with goods, vividly dyed fabrics, ripe fruits, aromatic spices, and handcrafted trinkets. Amidst the lively chaos, Alessandro Bernardi navigated the crowd, his senses attuned to the rhythms of the city. Though he often found inspiration in the melodies of daily life, his mind was elsewhere that morning. Since the night he had encountered Isabella di Rossi, her voice had lingered in his thoughts, a haunting refrain that refused to fade. As Alessandro turned a corner near a stall selling fresh figs, he spotted her. Isabella stood at a vendor's table, examining a bouquet of wildflowers. Her golden hair was tied back with a simple ribbon, and her gown, though modest, carried an elegance that set her apart from the crowd. She seemed unaware of the world around her, her attention focused on the delicate blooms in her hands. Alessandro's heart quickened. It was as though the city, the noise, the throng of people, all of it, had faded into the background, leaving only her. Summoning his courage, Alessandro approached. "Buongiorno, signorina," he said, his voice steady despite the flutter in his chest. "Do you always leave flowers in awe of your beauty?" Isabella turned, startled at first, but her expression softened when she recognized him. A faint blush rose to her cheeks, though she quickly recovered. "Buongiorno, maestro," she replied, her tone playful yet reserved. "Do you always greet strangers with such boldness?" "Only when the stranger's song has haunted my dreams," Alessandro said with a small smile. He gestured to the flowers. "Do you prefer roses, or do these wild blossoms speak to you more?" Isabella laughed softly, a sound that carried the same melodic quality as her singing. "These are humble, yet they have a charm the roses lack. Sometimes simplicity holds the greatest beauty." Her words struck Alessandro, their meaning resonating beyond the flowers in her hands. He realized then that she was not merely the daughter of a bishop, a figure confined to gilded halls and sacred hymns. She was a soul with depth, curiosity, and an unspoken longing that mirrored his own. They continued to talk, their conversation flowing as naturally as a stream. Alessandro learned that Isabella's love for music had been nurtured in secret. Though she had grown up surrounded by hymns and psalms, her heart yearned for melodies that spoke of life and love. Her father, Bishop Lorenzo di Rossi, had strictly forbidden her from exploring music beyond the church's approval. Despite this, Isabella had taught herself to play the lute in stolen moments, using a hidden instrument gifted by a sympathetic maid. "It is a beautiful instrument," Isabella said, her voice tinged with sadness. "But it has only known the confines of my chamber." Sometimes I feel as though my music is a caged bird, its wings clipped before it can soar." Alessandro's chest tightened at her words. He understood all too well the pain of suppression, the ache of a soul that yearned to create freely. "A bird cannot sing if it knows only a cage," he said softly. "But perhaps it can learn to fly if given the chance." From that day forward, their paths crossed often, sometimes by chance, sometimes by design. They began to meet in secret, slipping away to quiet corners of the city where the watchful eyes of the church could not follow. Alessandro introduced Isabella to the complexities of counterpoint and harmony, showing her how to weave emotion into every note. In turn, Isabella shared her love of poetry, reciting verses that spoke of longing, passion, and the bittersweet nature of forbidden love. Together, they created a world of their own, one where music and words intertwined to form something transcendent. One evening, as they sat beneath an ancient olive tree outside the city walls, Alessandro placed a lute in Isabella's hands. "Play for me," he urged, his voice filled with quiet encouragement. Isabella hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed the strings. But as she began to play, the hesitation melted away. The melody that emerged was simple yet profound, a reflection of her heart. Alessandro listened, his eyes never leaving hers, as the music wove a tapestry of vulnerability and strength. "You have a gift," he said when she finished, his voice thick with emotion. "Your music, it is like sunlight breaking through the clouds. Do not let anyone dim it." Their connection deepened with each meeting, but the shadow of danger loomed ever closer. Alessandro knew the risks they faced. The church's grip on Florence was unyielding, and to defy its authority was to invite ruin. Yet he could not turn away from Isabella. Her spirit, her courage, and her passion ignited something within him that he could not deny. She became his muse, the inspiration behind a new composition unlike any he had ever attempted. He called it l'amore proibito, the forbidden love. The symphony was bold and daring, blending sacred hymns with secular undertones in a way that defied convention. It was a declaration of love, not just for Isabella, but for the freedom to create, to feel, to live without chains. Each note carried the essence of their shared dreams, their whispered confessions, their stolen moments beneath the stars. But as Alessandro worked tirelessly on the symphony, he knew that their love, and the music it inspired, could not remain hidden forever. The church's reach was vast, its eyes and ears everywhere. And yet, in the face of such overwhelming power, Alessandro and Isabella chose to hold on to hope. For in their hearts, they believed that love, like music, was a force that could not be silenced. Chapter 3: Whispers of the Inquisition. Rumors of Alessandro's unconventional music began to ripple through Florence, carried by whispers in the markets, the taverns, and the dimly lit chambers where clergy and noblemen convened. The melodies of his latest compositions, described by some as divine and others as dangerously heretical, had stirred the curiosity and suspicion of the city's religious authorities. Among those who took notice was Bishop di Rossi, a man known not only for his rigid adherence to the Church's doctrines but also for his uncompromising authority as Isabella's father. The bishop, upon learning of Alessandro's growing influence, summoned his advisors. In the dimly lit study of the palazzo, where tapestries depicting biblical scenes lined the walls, he pored over reports from his informants. "This man," the bishop declared, his voice cold and deliberate, "has ensnared my daughter with his blasphemous notions and dares to mock the sanctity of our traditions. he ordered Isabella confined to her chambers and issued a stern warning to his household: any attempt to contact Alessandro would result in severe consequences. Isabella's world grew smaller with each passing day. The once vivid tapestry of Florence, its markets, and its music now existed only as fleeting memories beyond the barred windows of her room. Her only solace came in the form of Alessandro's secret messages. Smuggled into the palazzo by her loyal maid, each sheet of music carried a hidden code, a cipher of love and defiance that only she could decipher. The notes, carefully arranged, spelled out phrases of encouragement and promises of reunion. Isabella, in turn, responded with small tokens: a pressed flower, a line of poetry written on the margin of a hymn, or an embroidered handkerchief with a melody stitched in thread. Meanwhile, Alessandro's life became a delicate dance of creation and caution. By day, he composed commission pieces that adhered to the Church's strict guidelines, masking his true ambitions. By night, he poured his heart into L'amore proibito, the forbidden love, a symphony that defied every constraint imposed by the clergy. Its movements intertwined sacred hymns with secular melodies, creating a tapestry of sound that was both reverent and rebellious. Each note was a tribute to Isabella, their shared dreams, and their defiance of the forces that sought to keep them apart. As Alessandro worked, the shadows of the Inquisition loomed ever closer. The Church, alarmed by the growing whispers of his heretical music, dispatched spies to observe his movements. Alessandro's friends, aware of the danger, implored him to flee Florence. "You must go," urged Matteo, a fellow musician and trusted confidant. "The Inquisition will not rest until they silence you." But Alessandro, with a resolve as steadfast as his love for Isabella, refused. "If I leave," he replied, "they win. And I will not abandon her." The Inquisition's investigations intensified. Alessandro's home was searched, his associates interrogated, and his movements scrutinized. Despite the mounting pressure, Alessandro remained undeterred. He found refuge in the hidden corners of Florence, the candlelit cellar of a sympathetic merchant, the attic of an artist's workshop, and the quiet sanctuary of an abandoned chapel. It was in these clandestine spaces that he continued his work, refining each movement of the symphony and committing its essence to memory, knowing the risk of confiscation was ever present. For Isabella, the confinement became a test of her spirit. Each coded message from Alessandro renewed her hope, but the weight of her father's expectations and the omnipresent threat of discovery bore down on her. One evening, as the bells of the Duomo tolled, she knelt by her window and whispered a prayer, not for deliverance, but for the courage to endure. The climax of this chapter came one fateful night, when a servant loyal to the bishop uncovered one of Alessandro's coded messages hidden among Isabella's belongings. The bishop, enraged, summoned the Inquisition. Guards descended upon Alessandro's workshop, tearing through his manuscripts and arresting several of his associates. Alessandro narrowly escaped, retreating to the sanctuary of a friend's villa on the outskirts of the city. Despite the close call, Alessandro's resolve only deepened. "They may silence my voice," he confided to Matteo, "but they will never silence the music." As the Inquisition tightened its grip on Florence, Alessandro knew time was running out. He worked tirelessly, inscribing the symphony onto vellum and entrusting fragments to his most loyal allies. Each fragment, a piece of his soul, was sent to safe havens beyond the city's reach. As the chapter closed, Florence stood on the precipice of a reckoning. The Church's pursuit of Alessandro had set in motion a chain of events that would test the limits of love, art, and defiance. And in the quiet corners of the city, amidst the flicker of candlelight and the rustle of parchment, Alessandro and Isabella's story continued to unfold, driven by a symphony that refused to be silenced. Chapter 4: A Secret Performance. The city of Florence slumbered under the cover of darkness, but in a hidden corner of the city, far from the watchful eyes of the Church, a bold act of defiance was about to unfold. Alessandro Bernardi, his heart pounding with equal parts fear and exhilaration, prepared for what could be the most important performance of his life. With the help of sympathetic friends, merchants, poets, and fellow musicians, he had secured a secret venue beneath the bustling home of a wealthy merchant, where thinkers and artists often gathered in hushed rebellion against the oppressive constraints of the Church. The chamber was small but elegant, its low ceilings adorned with wooden beams, and its walls lined with shelves of books and trinkets that whispered of a world unbound by dogma. Candles cast a flickering glow, their light dancing across the faces of the audience as they took their seats. The crowd was a mixture of nobles, scholars, and commoners, united by their shared love for art and their quiet defiance of the Church's iron rule. Alessandro surveyed the room, his eyes searching for Isabella. She was there, hidden beneath a hooded cloak, her golden hair tucked away, but her eyes shone with a light that only he could see. As the murmurs of anticipation grew, Alessandro took his place at the harpsichord, joined by a small ensemble of trusted musicians. In his hands were the precious pages of l'amore proibito, his magnum opus, a symphony born of love, longing, and rebellion. The air was thick with tension as he gave a solemn nod to his players. The first notes rang out, a delicate melody that seemed to hover in the air like a prayer. The room fell silent, every ear attuned to the music that wove together the sacred and the secular in a daring tapestry of sound. The symphony unfolded like a story, each movement revealing a new chapter of Alessandro and Isabella's forbidden love. There were moments of tender sweetness, where the strings whispered of stolen glances and secret meetings, and others of fiery passion, where the brass and percussion thundered with the intensity of their bond. The audience was spellbound, their faces illuminated not just by candlelight but by the raw emotion that poured forth from the music. Some wept openly, their tears a testament to the power of Alessandro's creation. But even as the symphony soared to its crescendo, danger lurked in the shadows. Unbeknownst to Alessandro, spies loyal to the Inquisition had infiltrated the gathering, their stern faces betraying no hint of the beauty they were witnessing. These men were not moved by art or love, they were instruments of the Church, their mission to root out heresy wherever it dared to bloom. As the final notes of the symphony faded into a poignant silence, the room erupted into applause, an applause that was abruptly cut short by the sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs. The door to the chamber burst open, and the room was flooded with the cold light of lanterns held by soldiers of the Inquisition. Panic rippled through the crowd as the soldiers barked orders, their voices harsh and unyielding. Alessandro was seized, his hands bound roughly behind his back, but his eyes remained fixed on Isabella, who stood frozen in the chaos. Her father's spies had done their work well, and she too was dragged away, her hood falling to reveal her identity. Gasps of recognition filled the room, and Alessandro's heart broke as he saw the fear in her eyes. The soldiers tore through the chamber, confiscating instruments, books, and most devastatingly, the sheet music for l'amore proibito. Alessandro struggled against his captors, shouting for them to spare the music, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. The precious pages were tossed into the flames of a brazier, their edges curling and blackening as the symphony was reduced to ash. Yet even as the physical embodiment of his work was destroyed, the melody lingered in the minds of those who had heard it, its beauty seared into their memories. The audience was dispersed, warned of dire consequences should they speak of what had transpired. Alessandro was dragged through the streets of Florence, his head held high despite the jeers of the guards. Isabella was taken back to her father's house, her dreams of freedom shattered. The hidden chamber, once a sanctuary for creativity and rebellion, was left in silence, its walls bearing witness to a night that would not soon be forgotten. For Alessandro, the performance of L'amore proibito was both a triumph and a tragedy. Though he had poured his soul into the symphony, its notes now existed only in fragments, hummed by those who dared to remember, whispered in darkened corners, and carried in the hearts of those who had been forever changed by its message. And for Isabella, the night marked the beginning of a new struggle, as she fought to keep the memory of their love alive in a world that sought to erase it. The secret performance had been a bold act of defiance, but it came at a cost. Yet even in the face of loss and betrayal, Alessandro and Isabella's love endured, its melody refusing to be silenced. Chapter 5: The Prisoner's Resolve. The dank, suffocating air of Alessandro's cell pressed in on him like the walls of a tomb. The single barred window high above let in only the faintest sliver of light during the day, and at night, the cell was a realm of utter darkness. Alessandro had been stripped of all his belongings, even his lute, but not his resolve. Each passing day brought whispers of trial, accusations of heresy, and the looming shadow of execution. Yet, even as he faced this grim reality, Alessandro's mind clung fiercely to two things, his music and his love for Isabella. Isabella, meanwhile, was confined within the gilded cage of her father's palazzo. Her room, though opulent, became her prison. The ornate crucifix on the wall seemed to mock her despair, a reminder of the authority that had torn her from Alessandro. In her solitude, she poured her emotions into letters she could never send. On parchment hidden beneath her mattress, she wrote of her undying love and her dreams of freedom, her words weaving a tapestry of hope and sorrow. In his cell, Alessandro's creativity became his lifeline. With nothing but a shard of stone he had found in the corner, he etched crude notations and melodies onto the damp walls. He composed in his mind, each note a defiance against the silence that surrounded him. The symphony of his heart refused to be silenced. He envisioned grand crescendos and haunting refrains, pieces that spoke of love, freedom, and rebellion. He named this mental composition La Sinfonia della Resistenza, the Symphony of Resistance. News of Alessandro's imprisonment spread through Florence like wildfire. Among the city's artists, scholars, and even some sympathetic clergy, whispers of his defiance inspired quiet acts of rebellion. In secret gatherings, they spoke of his courage and the injustice of his incarceration. The fragments of L'amore proibito that lingered in the memories of those who had attended the secret performance became rallying cries for those who longed to challenge the Church's stranglehold on art and expression. Among these allies was Lorenzo, a painter known for his subtle critiques of authority hidden within religious commissions. Lorenzo had been in the audience that fateful night and had committed parts of Alessandro's symphony to memory. He began sketching plans with a small group of like-minded individuals to secure Alessandro's freedom. The group included Caterina, a fiery poet who used her verses to ignite the spirits of the disillusioned, and Marco, a merchant with deep pockets and a network of trusted contacts. As the days turned into weeks, Alessandro's physical condition began to deteriorate. The meager portions of stale bread and water provided by his jailers did little to sustain him. Yet his spirit remained unbroken. Each night, as the world outside slept, Alessandro hummed fragments of his symphony to himself, his voice a faint echo in the oppressive silence of the prison. The guards occasionally mocked him, calling him a madman, but Alessandro paid them no heed. In his mind, the melodies grew richer and more intricate, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. One stormy evening, as rain lashed against the prison walls, Alessandro heard a commotion outside his cell. Through the small, barred window in his door, he caught a glimpse of a familiar face, Lorenzo. The painter had managed to bribe one of the guards to deliver a message. It was a piece of parchment, smuggled into Alessandro's cell hidden within a hollowed loaf of bread. On it was a simple drawing of the secret garden where he and Isabella had first met, accompanied by the words, "Hold fast. Help is coming." The message reignited Alessandro's hope. He knew that Lorenzo and their allies were risking everything for him. It was a reminder that he was not alone in his struggle. He clung to the thought of Isabella, imagining her golden hair and the way her voice had blended with his melodies. He vowed to see her again, to hold her hand and play the symphony they had inspired together. Meanwhile, Isabella's confinement grew more unbearable. Her father, Bishop di Rossi, had forbidden her from any form of contact with the outside world, fearing that she might try to reach Alessandro. But Isabella was determined. She enlisted the help of her maid, Lucia, who had long been loyal to her. Under the guise of delivering laundry, Lucia began smuggling messages to Lorenzo and his group. Isabella's letters, though brief, were filled with encouragement and information about the bishop's movements, which proved invaluable to their plans. As the group's efforts to free Alessandro intensified, they encountered numerous obstacles. The prison was heavily guarded, and the church had placed spies throughout the city. Lorenzo and Marco spent sleepless nights devising strategies, while Caterina wrote impassioned poems that subtly rallied support among the people. Every step was fraught with danger, but their determination never wavered. In the deepest moments of despair, Alessandro found solace in an unexpected source, the faint strains of a melody carried on the wind. One night, as he sat hunched in his cell, he heard a lute being played outside the prison walls. The melody was unmistakable, it was Isabella's favorite hymn. Though the notes were faint, they filled Alessandro's heart with renewed strength. He realized that his love for Isabella and his devotion to his art were not just acts of defiance but declarations of the enduring power of the human spirit. The stage was set for a daring plan to free Alessandro, one that would require every ounce of courage, cunning, and unity from those who believed in him. The shadows of Florence's prison walls could not dim the light of his resolve. Alessandro Bernardi, the composer whose music defied an empire, awaited his moment to reclaim his freedom and his love. Chapter 6: A Daring Escape. The days in the dark, damp cell seemed to stretch endlessly before Alessandro. His once vibrant spirit had become worn down by the cold stone walls and the constant, oppressive silence. He had heard whispers from his fellow prisoners, rumors of the Inquisition's wrath, of the looming trial for heresy, of the impending judgment that might befall him. His crime was not simply his music, but his defiance, his unrepentant love for Isabella, and the symphony El Amore Proibito that had dared to challenge the very foundations of the Church's authority. In the stillness of his cell, Alessandro's thoughts would often wander to her, Isabella, the woman whose love had sparked the fire of rebellion in his heart. He could still hear her voice in his mind, the way it sounded when she sang their forbidden melodies under the olive tree, their secret garden, where their souls had entwined. He wondered if she was safe, if she had been locked away as well, or if she was still out there somewhere, trying to hold on to the fragments of their dream. But even as Alessandro was consumed by these thoughts, he knew one thing for certain: he could not stay. His very existence was an affront to the powers that had held Florence in their iron grip for centuries. He could feel the walls of his prison closing in on him, the air growing thinner, his time running out. But there was still hope. There was a plan. Alessandro had heard from his contacts, those few brave souls who had not yet been silenced by the church, that help was on the way. Word of his arrest had spread like wildfire, and many of the artists, scholars, and free thinkers who had supported him from the shadows were rallying to his cause. Among them were men and women who had defied the church in the past, whose names were whispered in fearful awe. Some were composers, others poets and painters, and still others who had no name at all, just faces in the crowd, familiar but unknown. It was on one stormy evening, when the winds howled outside the thick stone walls of the prison, that Alessandro's fate took a turn. A loud knock on his cell door startled him from his reverie, followed by the sound of a key turning in the lock. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside, a man disguised in the somber robes of a priest. Alessandro's heart leapt in his chest. He knew this man. He was Matteo, one of the many allies who had been working tirelessly to secure his release. Matteo's face was drawn, his brow furrowed with concern, but his eyes shone with a quiet determination. "The time has come," Matteo whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm that raged outside. "We have a plan. They'll be coming for you soon. You need to leave now." Alessandro could hardly believe what he was hearing. His pulse quickened as he tried to absorb the information. He had heard of the plans, of the daring rescue being prepared, but he never thought it would come to fruition. The Inquisition had eyes everywhere. The streets of Florence were full of spies and informants. How could anyone hope to break him out of the prison that had become his tomb? Matteo leaned in closer, his voice urgent. "We've disguised ourselves as clergy. We'll smuggle you out in a cart of wine barrels. The guards won't question it. You'll be free before they even realize what's happened." Alessandro's heart raced as the enormity of the escape sank in. It was risky, almost impossible. But it was also his only chance. He knew he could not remain here any longer. He had to find Isabella, to see her once more. He had to flee Florence and escape the clutches of the church that had imprisoned him, not just physically, but in every sense of the word. "I'm ready," Alessandro said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Let's do it." Matteo nodded sharply and turned to leave the cell. "Follow me. Stay quiet, and don't make a sound." The plan was as simple as it was dangerous. Matteo led Alessandro through the labyrinthine corridors of the prison, his steps swift and silent. The prison was eerily quiet that night, save for the constant rumble of thunder overhead and the occasional creak of the old building. Alessandro's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm, to focus on the task ahead. Every step brought him closer to freedom and closer to Isabella. They reached the back gate of the prison, where a cart filled with wine barrels awaited. The cart was old, the barrels weathered with age, their contents concealed beneath layers of straw and cloth. It was the perfect disguise. Matteo helped Alessandro into the cart, signaling for him to lie low and remain out of sight. For a moment, everything seemed still, as if the world had frozen in anticipation. The storm outside raged on, the rain pouring in torrents as the cart began to roll forward, pulled by a single horse. Alessandro's heart raced with every bump of the wheels, every creak of the cart. He could only pray that their plan would succeed, that the guards would not question the cart or its contents. As they passed through the gates of the prison, Alessandro dared not breathe too loudly. The guards, accustomed to the arrival of goods and supplies, paid them no heed. The cart rolled through the streets of Florence, its destination unknown, and Alessandro's mind raced with thoughts of Isabella. Would she be waiting for him? Would she even know he was coming? Could he truly escape the clutches of the church and live freely, side by side with the woman he loved? They passed through the city's winding streets and out into the countryside, the storm raging around them, its fury matched only by Alessandro's sense of urgency. Every moment brought him closer to the unknown. His thoughts were a whirlwind of fear and hope, but he held on to one certainty: he could not live without Isabella. He could not leave her behind. After what felt like an eternity, the cart came to a stop. Matteo, ever vigilant, motioned for Alessandro to remain still. He slid off the cart and disappeared into the night. Moments later, he returned, his face illuminated by the faint glow of a lantern. "She's waiting for you," Matteo said softly, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Go to her." Alessandro's heart soared at the news. Without a second thought, he climbed out of the cart, his legs shaky from the confinement, and followed Matteo through the dark, wet countryside. The world seemed to narrow, the storm now nothing more than background noise to the pounding of Alessandro's heart. They reached the small garden behind the stone wall, where a figure stood in the dim light. Isabella. She was standing alone, her silhouette framed by the flickering lantern, her hair falling around her like a halo. As their eyes met, Alessandro's breath caught in his throat. She was real, she was here, and she was waiting for him. Without a word, they rushed toward each other, their arms encircling one another in a desperate, longing embrace. It was a moment of pure relief, of joy so deep it threatened to overwhelm them both. Their love, which had been forbidden, had survived, and now it would carry them away from the suffocating grasp of Florence. "I thought I would never see you again," Isabella whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I thought I had lost you forever." Alessandro held her close, feeling the warmth of her body against his, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat in sync with his own. "I will never leave you," he promised. "We will be together." They both knew that their time in Florence was over. The city, once a place of beauty and inspiration, had become a prison for their love. There was no future for them there, no freedom. But Venice. Venice was different. A city of canals, of art and music, where the shadow of the church did not hold the same sway. There, they could be free. With the help of their allies, Alessandro and Isabella fled to Venice, the city where their love could blossom without fear, where they could finally begin a new life together. And as they boarded the ship that would take them away from everything they had known, Alessandro looked back one last time at the city that had both nourished and destroyed him. Florence was behind them now, and before them lay the uncertain yet hopeful future of Venice. Chapter 7: The Legacy of Love. The city of Venice, with its labyrinth of canals, narrow alleys, and ancient buildings, welcomed Alessandro and Isabella with open arms. It was a place of freedom, a city where the weight of the Inquisition could not reach, and the air was thick with the sound of art, music, and philosophy. It was here, in this city of liberation, that their new life began. At first, they lived humbly, in a modest apartment nestled in one of the quieter corners of the city. The bustling streets of Venice, with their intricate maze of waterways and stone bridges, became their new home. They took solace in the simplicity of their life, no longer forced to hide their love or their music, no longer burdened by the oppressive power of the church. It was a new beginning, but it was one they had earned through hardship, sacrifice, and the unyielding strength of their love. Alessandro spent his days in a small, dimly lit room, the walls lined with parchment and ink-stained paper. He would sit at his desk, lost in thought, as he worked tirelessly to rewrite L'amore proibito. His memories of the symphony, the melodies they had crafted together, were the only guide he needed. With every stroke of the quill, he brought their love and their struggle back to life. It was an act of rebellion, yes, but it was also an act of love, a tribute to the woman who had stood by him through every trial, every hardship. He knew the symphony would carry their story, their emotions, their passion, and their pain long after they were gone. Isabella, too, found herself immersed in the world of music once more. She took up her lute, her fingers dancing across the strings as she played the melodies that had once been whispered in secrecy. She would often join Alessandro in the evenings, their music blending together in harmony, a beautiful expression of the love that had withstood the test of time and tyranny. Together, they composed new pieces, works that reflected the freedom they had found in Venice, pieces that celebrated the power of love and the resilience of the human spirit. In Venice, they found a community of like-minded artists and intellectuals, men and women who, like them, had been forced to flee oppressive regimes and find refuge in this city of liberation. They gathered in salons and hidden chambers, discussing philosophy, art, and music, their conversations filled with passion and conviction. It was in these gatherings that L'amore proibito was first performed publicly, no longer a secret, no longer hidden in the shadows. The symphony echoed through the grand halls of Venice, its bold, sweeping melodies filling the air and captivating all who heard it. It was a work that defied authority, a testament to the power of art and love in the face of oppression. The performance was a triumph. The audience, a mix of nobility, artists, and intellectuals, was moved to tears by the music, by the raw emotion that pulsed through every note. It was a declaration of freedom, a challenge to the forces that sought to silence them. And in Venice, where the air was thick with rebellion and creativity, their message was received with open arms. L'amore proibito became a symbol of resistance, a piece of music that inspired others to rise up, to challenge the status quo, and to refuse to be silenced. As the years passed, Alessandro and Isabella's life in Venice became one of peace and fulfillment. They continued to compose and perform together, their love growing stronger with each passing day. They found joy in the simple pleasures of life, the quiet mornings spent walking along the canals, the evenings spent in the company of friends, the shared moments of laughter and love. They had come to understand that the true essence of freedom was not just in the absence of oppression, but in the ability to live authentically, to create without fear, and to love without restraint. And yet, their journey was not without its challenges. The scars of the past remained, etched deep within their souls. The memory of the Inquisition, of the fear and pain they had endured, would never fully fade. But in Venice, they found healing in their art, in their music, and in the love that had sustained them through it all. They had found a place where they could finally be free, and in that freedom, they flourished. One sunny afternoon, years after their arrival in Venice, Alessandro and Isabella walked along the canals, hand in hand, as they often did. The city was bustling with life, the sounds of gondoliers singing, the laughter of children playing in the streets, and the gentle ripple of water against the stone edges of the canals. It was a perfect day, warm, peaceful, and full of promise. As they walked, they heard the faint sound of music floating toward them, a melody that seemed strangely familiar. Turning a corner, they saw a street musician standing by a canal, his weathered guitar in hand. He was playing a fragment of L'amore proibito, the very same symphony that had been born in the shadows, that had been the catalyst for their escape, their journey, and their new life. The musician's fingers moved with ease over the strings, his voice soft but clear as he sang the words that had once been whispered in secrecy. Alessandro's heart swelled with emotion as he recognized the tune, the unmistakable notes of their symphony carried on the wind. He stopped, his gaze fixed on the musician, his mind racing with memories of the past, the love, the loss, the struggle, and the victory. Isabella, too, paused beside him, her eyes shining with the same recognition. They stood there for a moment, lost in the music, lost in the memory of everything they had fought for, everything they had endured. And as they listened to the music, Alessandro smiled, a smile that was filled with both joy and sorrow, a smile that spoke of the journey they had taken and the love that had guided them every step of the way. In that moment, they understood. Their story, their love, had become immortal. It was no longer just their own. It had become a part of Venice, a part of the city that had given them refuge, a part of the world that had embraced their music, their defiance, and their passion. L'amore proibito would live on, not just as a piece of music, but as a symbol of the enduring power of love, creativity, and freedom. It was a legacy that would transcend time, a legacy that would inspire generations to come. And as the final notes of the symphony echoed across the canals, Alessandro and Isabella knew that their love had not only survived, it had thrived. It had become a beacon of hope, a testament to the strength of the human spirit, and a reminder that even in the darkest times, love and art could light the way.